Breaking news. In Sochi, Erdogan tries to win Putin over with grain diplomacy. On Monday, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president of Turkey, will travel to Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin in an effort to try to salvage a grain export agreement with Ukraine before the autumn harvest. After 3 months of brutal battles along Ukraine's southern front, the time has come for Erdogan and Putin to meet face-to-face for the first time since October. Some Western officials are debating whether or not to hold peace negotiations, and the Turkish leader hopes to use the informal summit in the Black Sea resort of Sochi as a springboard for such talks. However, the two sides insist on holding any such talks on their own terms. Erdogan is one of the few NATO leaders who has kept lines of communication open with Putin. Since Russia began its special military operation in February 2022, the two leaders' close but tumultuous relationship appears to have strengthened. The economic crisis that threatened Erdogan's re-election in May was partially alleviated thanks to Putin's decision to discount and delay Turkey's payments for Russian gas imports. In return, Turkey has become an essential hub for Russian access to services and goods by refusing to join Western sanctions against Moscow. However, Erdogan has further irritated Putin by providing weapons to Ukraine and supporting that country's aspirations to join NATO. When Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Turkey in July, he was allowed to bring back 5 commanders whom Russia had sent to Turkey in a major prisoner swap, which enraged the Kremlin. The Kremlin warned that it would take this into account in our future agreements with Erdogan if the commanders were not allowed to remain in Turkey. Nonetheless, in their dispute over grain and Black Sea hostilities, Moscow and Kyiv are now looking to Erdogan for support. Only assurances. In response to Russia's breach of the grain agreement in July, Ukrainian port infrastructure was repeatedly attacked, prompting counterattacks from Kyiv around the Black Sea. It ended the only major agreement reached between the two sides during the conflict. A reduction in global food prices and a lessening of hunger in Africa and parts of the Middle East were both direct results of Ukraine's ability to export more than 32 million tons of grain under the agreement. Turkey is attempting to revive the agreement it helped broker between Moscow and Kyiv with the support of the United Nations so that it can regain the diplomatic prestige it lost when the agreement collapsed. To facilitate these talks with Putin and prevent both sides from moving forward with competing grain export plans, Erdogan sent Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan to Kyiv and Moscow. To reduce the risk of a Russian attack, Ukraine has sent 4 ships to try out a new route that briefly enters international waters but otherwise largely follows those controlled by NATO members. To counter Qatar's proposed deal to provide free food to Africa, Moscow has proposed its own plan to send discounted grain to Turkey for processing. Russia claims that Western restrictions on Moscow's access to global payment systems and insurance rendered last year's deal ineffective in removing indirect restrictions on Moscow's grain and fertilizer exports. Hakan advocated for a new grain proposal from UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres in Moscow, but Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov dismissed it. Even after all the promises, Lavrov said, there still isn't a single guarantee in this proposal.